Israel, I'm out here to demand an immediate ceasefire. Many of us here hold Israeli citizenship. For some of us, Israel is our first home. The Israeli people are my people. Israel is where I was born and raised. What that means for me is that I got to experience over time my government canceling more and more possibilities for Israeli society to be anything that resembles a humane and reasonable society. Israel, I grew up not far from Gaza, maybe an hour away, but until way too late in my life, and this is the case for most, if not all, Israeli children, to me, Palestinians had no name and no face. They were a questionable idea. And I am now living with the large-scale consequences of my ignorance. Our ignorance was manufactured in order to allow the continued illegal dispossession and occupation of Palestinians by our government. I'm demanding a ceasefire because no idea or ideology is more important than a single human life.
Israel's state's
What do we want?
toward Palestinian people
When do we want it?
since day one of its
When
foundation
do we
has
want?
been long-term compromising the
When do we want
safety of Jewish
If we
Israeli
don't get
citizens
it?
in the country.
If we don't get it,
And at this point,
if
it's
we
become
don't get
a
it,
real grave
What do
concern.
we want?
The way you've seen, like when
do we
you
want it?
ignore people
What
in a
do we
systematic
want?
way, in a deadly
When
way,
do we want it?
for such a long time,
if we don't
you
get
cannot
it,
expect
if we don't get
for
it,
violence to not happen.
if we don't get it.
Now,
Okay,
do
we'll
you
do
know
a
a
few
little bit
more
about
ceasefire
AIPAC
now, and
and
we'll
their
call it a night,
influences
because
in American
hopefully
politics?
ceasefire and end
I'm
the
aware.
conflict.
Can you
The
talk
Israeli
about that a
lobby.
little bit? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not
Ceasefire
I haven't
now.
researched them enough. I can only
Ceasefire
say
now.
that
Ceasefire
AIPAC
now.
is one of the groups
Ceasefire
that
now.
has been responsible
Ceasefire now.
for
Ceasefire
the American
now.
complicity in the
Ceasefire
Israeli
now.
regime of
Ceasefire
dispossession
now.
and occupation of the
Ceasefire
Palestinian
now.
people since the
Ceasefire now.
I mean, AIPAC specifically, I don't know, but since the Six-Day War, America, the U.S. government has become very much invested to the point where any war happening in Israel
Hoping to a ceasefire
since then has
immediately
been pretty
and
much
the
a satellite
conflict
war
within the
by America
And
that's kind of looking out for their
Palestine.
foreign policy interests in
We'll
the
see you
region,
again
turning
in-
Israeli society into
Until-
pawns, basically. We live
Thank you
in a
everyone
very
for showing up in
militarized
this
society where we're made to kind of accept the fact that this is our lives, that we live on the sword, that a good person is a good person who dies young, basically, jumping on a grenade or something. It's, it's very much, tied to American foreign policy. And American foreign policy at this point, everybody knows, including inside Israel, that the Israeli state will get to do this as long as America would let it.
And I was talking to Lila. You're forced to join the military as an Israeli citizen.
There's
right?
mandatory conscription,
Right.
yeah.
And if you don't, you go to jail or you serve time, whatever. But
Getting out of mandatory service could be very, very complicated, especially if you're a male. It's an incredibly painful and complex system. For a while in Israel, I worked at an organization that aimed at demilitarizing Israeli society. We worked at kind of disseminating information about how you could get out if you want to, because we believe, and working there, I also got to really experience this as a truth, that military system is not a place for young people when they're 18, 17. That situation is just inhuman, no matter how it's applied, and especially in a situation where it's applied in a way that's violating international law on a major scale and just traumatizing people to no end.
I got one more question for you.
Yes.
So, as Jews who have suffered in the past from ethnic cleansing, what do you think of the Israeli minister's statements about removing Palestinians from Gaza?
It's horrifying. And what's horrifying is from my perspective as an Israeli, to see how that became acceptable. That word has a different meaning now for some reason. it's alarming.
Now, being that you are against what Israel's doing, are you called a self-hating Jew or
Everything
anti-Semitic? How do you respond to people who say that?
I mean, depends on the situation. I just don't think, I think it's a distraction. I don't think that's what's really at stake now, my moral profile, and I think that usually that's used to distract me by making me kind of like concerned about my image or, how I'm perceived. I know the truth. I live in reality. And usually when, situations like these happen, at this point I've gotten pretty used to, kind of tuning into just the unimaginable amount of fear that's there when that's used. I think the difference between me and the person calling me that, if that's another Israeli Jewish person, is that I deal with my fear differently.
Well, thank you for speaking to me. Is there anything else you would like people to know?
So many things. I think from my perspective as an Israeli, I want people to know that, as I said before, Israeli society is damaged, it's compromised, spiritually, mentally, and materially at this point, by its investment in the occupation and the dehumanization of an entire group of people. But just like everybody else, that type of situation inspires people to rise up. There is a struggle going on in Israel against this. There's always been a struggle, and it's important to consider that for anybody who really cares about what happens to people from the river to the sea.
Tadas, we were talking about this morning about what does it mean to be Israeli and anti-Zionist and protest outside of Israel. And I grew up in the political left within Israel, and then coming here, it's a very different situation. And what we've always said is that, as Elisheva said, the left, the radical left within Israeli society is pretty weak. It is important and crucial, but it is something we've always said is that we need the support, the full support of our international allies in order to stop the occupation, stop apartheid, right now stop the genocide as well. So I thank all of the non-Israelis here as well who come and support this ongoing struggle, which now is for a specific purpose to stop the genocide, but is an ongoing one that we will not end here. So thank you for that. My name is Laila. I'm part of the organization Shoresh, which is an organization of anti-Zionist Israelis in the U.S., and we're organizing here in front of the Israeli consulate for a vigil.
Now, one question I have, as Jews who have suffered from ethnic cleansing in the past, what do you think of Israeli ministers' statements about removing Palestinians from Gaza?
So I just did, the speech I did in Hebrew actually talked about the connection between the specific Gazan poet and my grandfather, who is a Holocaust survivor. Well, was, he's passed away now. But yeah, I definitely see that connection between Jewish suffering historically to what is happening now. I think there's the worst violence comes from people who have been victimized in a way that turns them into something that removes humanity from them because they are so. It's weird to talk to him. Maybe okay. That's right. There's something about the victimhood that is correct. We have been victimized for centuries. I've lost 90+% of my family has been killed in the Holocaust. It is a very actual thing, but at the same time, that turns people into something that is so scared and so paranoid, and that then on top of it being fed by propaganda that has been fed to us as Israeli citizens since day one. I will say just another thing on top of that. There is an important thing about Hebrew. So most people in Israel, even if some of them speak English, it's not well enough necessarily. The media that we consume is in Hebrew primarily, and then when all of the information you consume is in Hebrew, the Hebrew media doesn't talk about Palestine. I grew up with a map that didn't have the West Bank on it. I didn't know what it was until I went and sought it out as a teenager. So we didn't even used to have that information available to us. Now with the internet, it's small, but it was so difficult even 10 years ago when I was, like 12 years ago, when I was trying to not enlist to the army. So the propaganda is really at the heart of it, feeding into the collective fear of everyone is against us, everyone is trying to kill us, especially now, everyone is anti-Semites. Free Palestine means kill us, when it doesn't necessarily at all means that. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. One more question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you feel Israel's slaughtering makes Israelis less safe in the long term?
Oh, 100%. I can answer it as like a fool.
Yeah.
The slaughtering, the massacre, the genocide of Palestinians that is happening now in Gaza, and the overall apartheid system that is existing in specifically the West Bank, but I would say all of even 48 territory, is 100% making Israelis less safe in the long term. Because how can you keep occupying and humiliating and killing a people without expecting them to retaliate? Now, the massacre that Hamas did on October 7th was horrible and brutal, but it didn't come out of nowhere. Of course, I do not condone it in any way. It's important to say a million times it was horrifying. I'm horrified by it. It is important because Israelis, yeah. But we all knew it was coming. I've known it is going to come always. So this will keep happening. Violence is a cycle, and as long as it's in that cycle and it's not being broken, it will keep Israelis less safe. And a lot of radical Israelis have always said, radical leftists, that Israel is the safe place in the world for Jews. It is the place where most Jews have been killed on the basis of being Jewish. So, yeah.
Yeah, wow. And even, so you have to join the military as an Israeli citizen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
You have to enlist for, well, it used to be 3 years for men and 2 years for women, but now they changed to be more equitable. So it's 2 years and 4 months for women and 2 years and 8 months for men.
And what happens if you refuse?
Oh, there's actually someone who's refusing right now and is going to prison, like an 18-year-old. If you refuse, it depends on how you refuse and what you do. So if you refuse on a moral ground and just say, I refuse, you will be imprisoned in military jail. Usually up to like from 2 months to like the longest that has been is 2 years, but that is it's a specific case of the 5 first conscientious objectors, like of that variety. There have been ones before, but so yeah, it's usually a few months until at some point they're like, okay, enough. And they let you go. So either you can do that or you can convince them you're mentally ill enough to not serve, which is what a lot of people do. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get out of the army, but if you refuse point blank saying, I refuse to do this, you will be in prison. Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like the audience to know about what's happening or what you're doing?
So, yeah, maybe I'll say it after the bus passes, just because I feel like the sound. So, I think for anyone who's watching this, it is so crucial to continue resisting to what is happening in Israel, Palestine, to the genocide, but also to the apartheid long term. But that also means hearing the voices that are coming from there, of Palestinians on the ground, of radical leftist Israelis on the ground, because we are there and we know what's happening and we will tell you it's terrible. Listen to us and work with us and amplify those voices. Root out anti-Islamist and anti-Arab and anti-Semitist notions from your midst, and there are plenty of those, and commit to the long-term leftist, not nationalist, leftist, anti-nationalist, anti-Zionist struggle against occupation and, yeah, freedom for all people.
Because there are thousands of Israelis who are protesting against
Netanyahu, yeah.
Campaign.
There are people there's many people who believe in the humanity of Palestinians. Because the thing that people don't understand, Gaza is a place that I've never been to because was under siege, and like no Israeli has been to in the past 16 years unless they're a soldier, and even those not really. But other than that, like we live in mixed cities. Haifa is a mixed city. It's Palestinian and Jewish. Jaffa, I worked at a nightclub that was Palestinian and Jewish, and it's not like a weird thing. Like we live amongst each other. We know each other. Many people view Palestinians as humans. Many people don't. And those voices are loud and are in power. But I do believe that we can ultimately have a humane society, and I can see how it would look like. I don't think it's unrealistic. People are like, oh, how will it happen? as we are, just without Jewish supremacy. Like, we already are in each other's culture so intensely, so like, yeah.
Every day we're learning more about the death and destruction that Israel is inflicting on Gaza and the escalating violence in the West Bank. We hear a new detail about the inhuman conditions of daily life of Palestinians, of whole families murdered, and we read new evidence of torture, of intentional bombing of civilian centers. Gaza is starving in an intentional man-made famine. Every person lives in hunger. It's been almost 3 months since the massacres on October 7th and since the unrelenting Israeli campaign of revenge against all Palestinians. And from here in the US, there's at this point a risk that we're going to start thinking this level of violence and destruction is normal. As whole histories of Gaza, of Palestine are erased, this was never normal. As families are destroyed, as new footage comes through our phones, as Israeli politicians make their genocidal intentions more and more explicit, I have to maintain some ability to continue to be shocked. This is urgent, even if it feels like we're screaming into the void. We need to help each other not get used to this and not let up. We're all here, everyone, thank you for coming out in the cold. We're all here to call for a ceasefire. So everyone here understands the horror and the urgency, probably better than I could explain. So I just want to say something about what we're doing here in New York, outside the Israeli consulate, around the corner, as Shoresh, as this new group that is forming and organizing this. It's an intense thing to say, like anti-Zionists, and we've had a lot of conversations. It feels scary. And it forces us to have painful conversations with the people that we really love the most and that are closest to us. And we can't dismiss this. It's not just like pain and discomfort. Some of us aren't speaking to our families and friends. It's a strain on our feeling at home in our home, on having a community. So we have to be this community for each other. Otherwise, I don't think I can keep this up.